You can do practice in the Red Book and practice on Grocket, but students find that they like to do one or the other, and Grocket tracks your progress. So that's why some students prefer Grocket. Other students really like pencil and paper, and they prefer the Red Book. Max, I'm so glad that you mentioned comma rules. Do you know, this is really auspicious, which is an SAT word. Means that something good happened, that we're having good luck. I have a slide that has the comma rules on it. I really do. It's over here. We're going to get to it, I promise. Okay, so let's take a look. And you can see where everybody is. So we have, that's interesting, 60%. We have the highest numbers for ACT reading video, week 2. That must be a big area of opportunity for us. So it's going to be one subject. Oh, actually, no. Going forward, we're going to do a couple subjects a week, because if you've already done the first 4 weeks, you've covered the majority of questions, question types. So at this point, we're just fine tuning. So we're going to go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like week 2 reading video 1. That's awesome to see. So if you haven't watched these videos, they don't take that long. The longest one is about 30 minutes long. And we are taking a look at how we can help you. So make this list. Think about if you prefer to practice with the Red Book or with Grocket. And then we're going to take you through what it's either going to be a review for you if you've already been working on this, or it's going to be new information. But either way, it's going to be valuable to you. So that's how we put this presentation together. We thought, you know what? Some people are going to be joining us new. Some people have already been here. Let's make this valuable for everybody here. We like to think a lot about how can we help. The Red Book is the real ACT book. So last time we met, we talked about study plan basics, and we're going to do a super short review of that one just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then what's really, really helpful is we're going to do a week 1 through 4 review of what did we introduce in the videos. So it's a review if you've watched them, or what is it that you're going to see in the videos when you do watch them. So in terms of study plan basics, whether you're just starting now, you're in the middle of a study plan, or you're nearing the end, if your study plan was multiple months, you always want to know what your current skill level is. So tell us in the chat box, why do you need to know your current skill level? We only want to know how you're going to do on test day, right? Why in the world do we have to, are we nosy? We're nosy people, aren't we? We just want to tell everybody. Luckily, your Grocket score is between you and us. We don't go broadcasting. Exactly. First, so we're pointing out 2 really great things. First of all, we want to know where we're at so we can see how we can improve. And then we also want to know what to focus on. So if you haven't done so already, and you can do this even without signing up for a monthly subscription, if you haven't done a free trial with Grocket, you can do, it will take you 1 hour at the most, and you can get a score prediction for all 4 multiple choice sections. So if you haven't done that yet, that's a great place to start. You might be doing way better than you thought, or you might have one section that's really strong and you want to focus on other sections. Wow, Ben, that's great to hear. So you went from a 23 to a 27. Those improvements are the ones we like to hear. So make sure you know your current skill level, and then continuously check in by either taking practice tests, or on Grocket you go to the skill tab, and that actually updates every night so that you can, as you're getting better, you can see your score prediction go up. Make sure you know when your test date is, and then the scheduling time to study is really important. It's very easy to just get to the end of the day and think, oh my gosh, I was supposed to do that. So whether you tell another person, put it on your calendar, put a reminder in your phone, just make sure you schedule time. So for week 1, we concentrated on very specific areas. So you might be looking at, wait a second, we did 2 points, number properties? Ugh, 2 points? Number properties are what we call a foundational concept. So we really wanted to talk about the basics that then show up in other questions. So there are going to be questions that specifically are about number properties, but in general, you just need to know the number properties rules. And then algebra, knowing elementary and intermediate algebra is super important. Inequalities and absolute value show up. And then in terms of ratios, proportions, and averages, those 4 points, they seem like, oh, if I know the average formula, I'm good to go. But they sometimes show up towards the end of the section. And so you have to make sure that you're following the suggested method so you're not missing out on points. So this first week that we did was concentrating on foundational concepts and making sure you're not missing out on points due to one teeny tiny step. Because we know for sure you're going to miss out on points on things you haven't learned yet, but you don't want to be thinking, oh my gosh, I knew that, but I didn't pick the right answer. So this is our recommended approach. And when do you think, and this is supposed to be the number 4, unfortunately our Adobe room ate the number 4, it was very hungry. Take a look at this approach and looking at the 4th, we're supposed to have the number 4 there, the 4th step, when do you think that is crucial? So it's always important to make sure you've answered the specific question asked, but when do you think that's absolutely crucial? When you're at the beginning of the section, towards the middle of the section, or at the end of the section? When is it crucial? David says the end of the section. What do we think? Max thinks the beginning. Morgan thinks the end. Michelle thinks the beginning. When do you think it gets more complicated? Where are the highest difficulty questions? There you go. Oh, Rama, I'm so glad you mentioned that. It is actually not random. Reading comprehension is totally random. Science, yep, random. English, generally random. Math, no way. It isn't. And that can help you to manage your time. So in our final event, we're going to be talking about timing, and it will show up in the videos as well. But the way your timing should go for the math section, the first 20 questions should take you less than 20 minutes. The middle 20 questions should take you about 20 minutes, and then the last 20 should take you more than 20 minutes because they're the hardest. They are, we promise. So that means that towards the end of the section, towards that long hour, the end of that long hour, you're going to be really checking to make sure you haven't missed a step. And how they do it usually is they'll ask you to solve for a variable, and then the final answer, they'll ask you for 1 over x rather than just x. So you'll have solved for x. Let's say you solved and x is 3/4, but they're asking for 1 over x. So if you found x equals 3/4, but they want 1 over x, what are you supposed to put down instead of 3/4? Instead of 3 over 4, what would 1 over x be? I'm loving those correct answers. Yep, you take the reciprocal, so it would be 4 over 3. And what's tough is they would have both answer choices. They would have 3 over 4 and 4 over 3. So you got to be really careful. It's towards the end of that section that they're going to ask you for an extra step. 4 over 3, you've got it. So they don't try to trick you. They're not out to be mean. They're not trying to make your life miserable, but they are checking to see if you are rereading the question before you bubble in your answer and make that final answer the one that you are sticking with. So starting with number properties, factors are very common. We have a poll, so don't shout out the answer down here. Instead, we want to give everybody an option. So let me clear this out. And go ahead and look at this question and see if you can answer it on your own. And I'm going to actually grab the pen. I will be right back. There we go. Now I can write. So if you're not quite sure what the answer is, have no fear. Your Grokka experts are here. And what we're looking for is what they have in common. So they share a 2 and they share 1 3 and 2 3s. So altogether, 2 times 3 times 3. Now the reason why we're showing this question, it would show up probably within the first 10 questions, but timing matters. You don't have all the time in the world to answer these questions. So what are some of the ways that you think people spend too much time on this question? Oh, I don't mean to keep writing. But it's just taken over here, like an alien's writing for me. Yes, Malay, yes. They try to either calculate the factors, or they draw a really elaborate factor tree, or they multiply everything. So that's something we don't want to see you do. We don't want you multiplying everything. That's going to take you a really long time. So the way it works, and I apologize for the weird writing, and Ethan can, we have a tech expert, Ethan, let me know if there's weird writing on the board because it's showing up strangely for me. But for, if you wanted to draw a factor tree, you could do 2 times 3 times 3. You'd wind up with, or you could write them out this way. That's another way to do it. You can stack them. I think a factor tree isn't going to be as nearly helpful as this. If you were to stack the two numbers here, okay, there is weird writing. Can't really help that one. It's called a bamboo pad. It just sort of wound up with a mind of its own. So if you do it this way, then I can go ahead and put a square, actually it'll wind up being a rectangle around it, and then you can see more clearly what they have in common. There we go. So that's what they have in common. We have 86% of you agree that the correct answer is C. We get a blue check mark. Oh, and I do need another 3 at the top. Thank you so much. I stopped writing because I knew they weren't going to have that guy in common. Silly me. So we have the 2, and we have the 3 3s, and then we have the 2 2s, not a 2 2, and then the 2 3s. Aaron, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. There were a lot of people letting me know. I knew I was going to draw my box around, so I stopped writing. So, and that's interesting. So I forgot to write that in because I know what the correct answer is. I picked the question out. Had I forgotten to put that on test date, I still would have gotten the right answer. So that's the thing about this test, is you don't have to be perfect. No one expects you to be perfect on test day. What we do want you to do is to have enough practice so that you can feel confident as you're going through the section. So even if you do leave something out, like that extra 3 like I did, you can still get to the correct answer. So that's a really good feeling of, oh my goodness, I actually have done this enough that first of all, I'm not hiding under my desk, and secondly, I have a feeling of what they're trying to ask. I'm trying to find out what they have in common. There are 3 3s in the first number. That is correct. Now, in terms of straightforward algebra, we want you to be confident with this as well. And looking at this question, the first thing that they're asking you to recognize is that you need to do something with the 3 and then in parentheses t minus 5. So what is that called? When we have a 3 and in parentheses t minus 5, our next move is to do a little dance. No, probably not. Paint a fence. What do we do with that 3 and that t and then the minus 5? Do we leave it like that? Because I'm not going to solve like that. It's not going to work so well. What do we do with that? What does it, so if you're not sure what it's called, what does it become? Does it become 3t minus 5? Because I gotta tell you, that happens sometimes. Gotta be really careful. So is that what we get? 3t minus 5? 3t minus, don't be scared. If you get it wrong, we'll figure out what needs to happen. Then we're going to add 7. Once we figure out what that number is, equals 5t plus 12. I have a missing spot. I need to fill the missing piece. I'm looking for my missing piece. I'm looking for my missing piece. 3t minus 5 or something else. Oh, and you guys are, I'm so sorry. It got stuck. I'm so sorry. You guys were answering. I couldn't figure out why. I thought, is it too hard? What was happening? Look at all those correct answers. I sincerely apologize, but hopefully it got everyone to answer a little bit more. But I thought, oh my gosh, am I being mean? Oh, I hope not. I thought y'all were hiding somewhere. Now, what I really love is that everybody was able to figure out what happens, and it was distribute. Yep, awesome. Excellent, excellent. Now, luckily on test day, you're not going to have any technical difficulties like I was having with my scrolling. Instead, you're going to feel confident. This is a really straightforward algebra question, but they're checking to see if you're paying attention to your distribution, paying attention to your signs, and what you're going to wind up finding out is, with 92% of you found out, the correct answer is going to be B. So let me go ahead and sketch this out real quickly for anybody who's still stuck. We want to make sure we got everybody on board here. So where do you think this question would be? In the middle, in the beginning, or at the end of a section? It would be at the beginning of the section, absolutely. And so these questions, how long do you think this question would take you on test day? Do you think it would take you 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, or longer than a minute? And it depends on how long you've been doing this type of math, how long ago you've seen it. Oh, somebody think, okay, 15 seconds, awesome. So that means that you're gonna be racking up time to then spend on other questions. So you don't wanna think of 60 questions in 60 minutes as something that you have to distribute evenly among all the questions. That's actually not going to be a great plan for you. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to think about how to go more quickly at the beginning, slow down in the middle, and at the end you can have a lot more time to answer those questions. So you're going to get t equals negative 10. Let me go back. Ethan, that's such a great question. Should you get in the habit of writing out the question instead of, we call it questions because problems makes it sound terrible. The question instead of solving in your head. Yeah, this is the thing. Don't reinvent the way you answer questions. If you like to do things in your head and that works for you, keep doing it. We're not here to revolutionize the way you take tests. However, if you know that's a problem for you, if you found that your accuracy isn't as good as when you write it down, then yes, please start writing things down, but go with your strengths. This isn't the first test you've ever taken. You want to use everything you already know, capitalize on that, and then add in these tips and strategies. So some students think, oh my gosh, it's like going into the Army. You got to get broken down and then built back up. And in some cases, when you're doing something in school, it is like that. These tests aren't. They're trying to assess how well you do certain things. You already do some of those things really well. So take that and then add on to it. So if you're used to writing it out, then don't change that unless it's taking you a lot of extra time. So the big thing we can tell you is you're going to know the most about how you're going to do on test day if you practice ahead of time. So for some students, they prefer writing things down. For other students, they'll do half and half. And for some students, they'd rather have a root canal than write things out. And they're accurate though in their head. So we don't bother them and say, oh my gosh, you have to do it this way or you're going to fail. First of all, there's no such thing as failing the test. And secondly, that's just mean. So we want to be supportive and we want to let you know that we are going to be showing you ways that you can do things. And then it's up to you to decide what's best for you. Ben, I actually really enjoy teaching math because when I was in high school, it was a struggle for me to do things quickly. I could always do the calculations and I was enthusiastic about it, but I was very meticulous. I wanted to write everything down. If it was messy, I would rewrite it. I would take forever. It was actually quite frustrating for my teachers because I was accurate. It was just so long. So now that I am working with students, it helps for me to be able to say to them, you know what? Let's work with what you got. What are you doing that's going well? And then let's adjust a few things. There's nobody here who's doing math completely wrong unless you're trying to do it with your eyes closed. That would not work out so well. Now what we're doing here is we have an averages question. This question would not be in the beginning of the test. This one would be more towards the middle. And one of the most common issues here is that students will just take the average of the first three numbers, and you're not going to get the number 170, and then you get stuck. And then we don't want you to cry. Can you tell us what is the actual average formula? If you know that, can you share that with us? It's average equals something. And I love it, Kaylee. Plug it in, plug it in. What is the average formula? And if you think you know the answer, go ahead and put it in the poll box. Madison, great question. Is there a really quick way to do this? Nisha, thank you so much for helping us. Nikila, I didn't see yours yet. So Bernie, I like that idea. Set up the equation. So for averages questions, it seems like, okay, is there a super quick way to do this? I can tell you no matter what way you try this, writing down the actual averages formula, it seems like it would slow you down. It actually helps you to put everything in place. So average equals the sum of the numbers over the number of numbers you have. And what's really tricky here is that the number is not the number 4. I was going to say, it's not the number 3. I gave it away. I was too excited. It's not the number 3. It's the number 4. There are four bowling scores total, and I would never bowl that well. I'm phenomenally awful at bowling. It's actually quite sad. So here are your options. Start plugging stuff in, either in your head or on paper. I, like I told you, am annoyingly meticulous, as one of my sisters pointed out to me one day. Gee, thanks, sis. That's awesome. Okay, so we've got plus x. Okay, so here are your options. You can back solve, starting with answer choice H, plug it in to see if it will give you, and here's another thing too, if you multiply both sides by 4, you can think of this as 170 over 1. If you multiply both sides by 4, you can then figure out how much it all has to equal. The other thing you can do is think about what would be too small or too big. It really has to do with what's fastest for you. For me, I would want to actually do the algebra. For other people, they like to plug in the numbers. But the big thing, the takeaway for you is that oftentimes writing down the average formula is worth the extra 2 seconds it takes, because then you can formulate everything in your head. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can take that average and put it over 1, and you can cross multiply. Plug the numbers in. Whatever makes you feel comfortable with this question is the way to go. Oh my gosh, big celebration. Look at this, everybody. 100% on this question. I have goosebumps. That's actually never happened in one of our events. That's really exciting. Oh my goodness. I am very impressed. And I gave you questions that were easier. And then on this question, you knocked it out of the park. That was incredible. So that feeling of this question, yeah, there were a couple of different ways that we could have gone wrong. Not for us. We got this. Gold star. Absolutely gold star. So now that we have a good handle on math, and more math is to come, in the first video that I did, I covered actually 18 points. So half of math is done if you've already done that. If not, then you can catch up at any time. What I'm going to do now is we're going to talk about reading. And the reason why we're not going to do a passage is because I had to pick and choose what we can do in an hour and a half. And the things that we were seeing, especially on our website, math and science, once you get a really good hang of those, you can see good score increases nearly immediately. It was English and reading that required a little more information about what you're supposed to be doing. Okay, so Ben, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, reading is the worst thing in the world, one of the things I talk about in the video is that you don't have to do them in order. So if you've always started with prose fiction, oh my goodness, gotta tell you, that one, unless you're particularly good at it, and some of our students are, they rock prose fiction, that is not one to start with, and we'll show you why. We are always using the same approach, but as you're taking notes, prose fiction is really tough to take notes for. It doesn't have a thesis. So gee, thanks people. Thanks whoever wrote the prose fiction piece. You're gonna make me read this and it doesn't have a thesis? Oh, how wonderful. So a lot of students have trouble with that particular type of passage because it's hard to write notes for, it doesn't have a thesis, and then you're not sure what the examples are. There's actually a way to get around that, and we'll show you how to do that in a moment. But in general, you're always looking for what the passage is talking about before you get to the questions. So if you've ever tried reading the questions first and then the passage, you're actually taking up a lot of time that you don't want to be using in that way. Instead, what you want to do is you want to take notes first. Another thing that we found that really helps students is the idea of predicting an answer. So in the math section, you are looking at the answer choices. In the English section, you're looking at the answer choices. Even in the science section, you can look at the answer choices and it's not going to skew your answer far to one side or the other. The reading section, if you look at the answer choices before you've made a prediction, you may make your head hurt. We don't want your head to hurt. We like you. We want to make sure that you have every chance possible of finding the correct answer. And if you have to actually take your hand and put it over those answer choices, please do so. Prediction is your best bet for finding the correct answer. And that's why prose fiction is actually one of the hardest passages, because they have a lot of inference questions. Inference questions, you can think about the author's main idea, but you're going to have to look at those answer choices, and all the answer choices are really well written. None of them make you laugh out loud, mostly because the test isn't funny, but none of them are laughably wrong. So please know, predicting an answer is a big deal in the reading section. So what do we want you to do? We wanted you to go ahead and tell us in the chat box. I've got the scrolling thing down so I can actually see. Oh, look at that. You were listening. Yes. Okay, so Jeremy, good question. So Jeremy says you were told to read the question and answers before. Here's the thing. All the questions are pretty much the same idea for all of the tests that you take. They're going to ask you different types of questions. Some are going to be detailed, some are going to be some are going to be inference questions. You can look at the questions ahead of time, but for the majority of students, I would say 80% plus students, their questions are down. It doesn't give them that much additional information, and then they don't have a lot of time. So if you found that it's super helpful for you to read the questions first, we're not going to tell you to not do that. You may be in that small percentage of students that it helps, but the majority of our students find it just slows them down. I'm not talking right now, but I am talking. Audio is good. So I'm talking about one of my most passionate subjects, which is ACT reading. I want to make sure everybody could hear me. Okay, it sounds like we're good now, but our technical experts will let us know if we run into any trouble. Technology is amazing. We're so excited to have people from all over joining us, but of course we run into some issues occasionally. Okay, and don't worry, no one is hearing voices in their head. It was voices somewhere else. So we're good now. And actually, this happens in the test. Sometimes you get distracted, and I just got distracted that moment. So we're going to clear, start over again. We want to make sure that you can stay focused, especially in the reading, and knowing what types of passages you're tackling makes a difference. So one of the questions is, wait a second, am I supposed to stop and answer questions? What am I supposed to do? You want to get a good idea of what the author's talking about first before you answer the questions. You may have heard other things, but a lot of what we're doing, we're basing on years and years and years of test prep experience. The majority of students benefit from understanding what the author is talking about before getting to the questions. So this is the best advice we found, and we've compiled it, and it's here, right here in this presentation for you. Starting with the fact that prose fiction doesn't have a thesis. It emphasizes characters and feelings. It has very few relevant details, meaning they don't start listing the age of the characters. You might get an idea of it. They're not going to say their life story. It's just going to be a small part of a story. And when you're reading, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be focusing on the characters, you're going to focus on the feelings and relationships, and you're going to be focusing on the author's tone and purpose. This takes practice. It really, really does. And one of the activities that some students find is really helpful is if you are reading a prose fiction passage, if you think about it in terms of a movie script. That makes it generally less boring to begin with. And secondly, it makes it a lot easier to conceptualize or make it into an idea in your head. When you focus on it in that way, it's a lot easier to pay attention to, okay, well, who would I cast in this role? In order to cast someone in a movie, what are some things you'd have to know about them? Go ahead and tell us in the chat box. What are some things you'd have to know about someone to cast them in a movie? Well, in terms of the characters, and I asked that question a little bit backwards. When you're reading the script, what do you have to know about the character before picking out an actor? Oh, Madison, I like it. Personality. So let's say you want to cast Sandra Bullock in something. Well, the character has to be of a certain what? You have to know what the character flaws are. You have to know what they look like. You have to know their ethnicity, their age, their mindset, all of that. Do you know what you're listing right now? Helpful things to keep in mind when you're doing prose fiction. It's so much more fun if you're thinking, you know what? Hey, I'm a casting director. I live in the Hollywood Hills. I have like 9 houses, and I'm going to pick out some actors for this script that I just received. Obviously, it's not going to be nearly as exciting as that, but if you're thinking about it in terms of characters, of the way they relate to each other, the chemistry that they have, you're actually going to be able to answer the questions so much better. It's going to be such a better way for you to approach it. It's going to take you less time. So, and that's just from working with students. We found, you know what, being bored doesn't help your score. So we found some really good ways to get around that. So prose fiction, you're going to have to practice it on your own, but we wanted to give you the details on how to get a good score for that particular passage type. Now, for natural sciences, it's totally different. There is a thesis, but you know what they sprinkle in there? Really weird terms. So what you're going to focus on is summarizing each paragraph and looking for major keywords. The keywords are going to help clue you in. So if they're talking about something like macrobiotics, you might not know very much about that. But if they say something like however or consequently, those clue you into what's happening. So don't panic. If you have an entire paragraph and you think, I have no idea what that sounded like all dinosaur names. What you're going to do instead is think, all right, well, how did it relate to the paragraph before it? And what's nice about natural science, it's laid out really well. Same with humanities and social sciences. The first paragraph, it's an intro. The last paragraph, totally a conclusion. So they're laid out really, really well. The thing is, though, natural sciences in particular just throws in really weird terms. So don't get we call it bogged down in the details. Instead, what you're going to look for is the overall structure. So for prose fiction and natural sciences, those are the hardest ones, and that's why we did those first. And you're halfway through reading if you've already done that. If not, you can pick up on that. The video's already posted, so don't worry about that. Varun, that's a great question. A lot of our students really like social sciences. That one is really straightforward. It's not too heavy in terms of reading through it, and it's usually about something in history or something that you can understand and have seen in a textbook. Humanities is similar, but you're going to find out for you what's easiest, and you're going to do that one first. Vanessa, great question. The first and fourth passages we think are the hardest. So do the ones that are best. We did them first in terms of our study plan to get through the hardest ones first. So that's what we did before we started our 8-week study plan. We sat down and thought, okay, what's the best way to do this? So for science, we decided that we're going to save the hardest for last. But the reason why we did that was because the hardest one only counts for 6 points. So why in the world would we have you doing the hardest one, but then you still have 30 points to learn? It's not a great strategy. Instead, we thought, you know what, let's dive right into the ones that are really accessible, the ones that don't make you hide under your desk. And we're going to demonstrate that right now. So the majority of your points come from these things called research summaries and data representation. I personally could do data representation all day long. It's here's a chart, find the numbers, fill in the answer. Oh my gosh, I could do that. I want those points, all 14 points for me. So those are the points that a lot of students feel really confident about. It's reading the graphs. And one of the major things, though, is just making sure that you're using the power of your pencil. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. So data representation generally isn't as challenging or scary as something like research summaries. But I promised you we were going to do some science questions. So let's do it, but let's use our recommended approach. So we're going to be doing questions with you. It's not going to be scary. We're going to be working together, and we're going to be talking about the best ways to use your time wisely. So if you feel like science is the hardest, that probably means that you are looking to improve your science score. So let's think about how to be as efficient as possible. The first thing we want to make sure we know is what the purpose, the method, and the results are. So the purpose, they actually have a really cool way to find it. It's usually a verb, so it's either to determine, to find, to discover. So look for that verb and we'll be able to figure out what the purpose is. The method just describes the way they did things, and then the results usually laid out really nicely in charts and tables. And then in the video, I talked about 2 very specific types of patterns. I talked about direct and inverse. So direct, actually I'll pause right here. I'll give you 2 options. We have, and I did it in the video, so temperature, you can hear me typing, but you can't see it yet. Just a second. So we have temperature and pressure, and volume and pressure. Which one is a direct relationship? As you increase one, the other one increases. Go ahead and tell us in the chat box if you know. If you don't, no problem. Temperature and pressure. They love this one on the ACT. So if we were doing an experiment with a soda bottle, I love this idea because I really would like to see if you could get it to explode. It sounds dangerous, don't do this at home. But I wonder if you heat it enough, will the top pop off? I feel like it would, right? Because the pressure would build up enough. Maybe if you shake it too, that's cheating in the experiment. But I'm wondering if it would. Yeah, so temperature and pressure. As you raise the temperature, the pressure in the soda bottle gets to be so great that hopefully it would be a really fun explosion. I wonder if Mythbusters has done it. Probably it's too easy for them. But that's the idea of as one goes up, the other goes up. That's a really common relationship in which you increase one, you increase the independent variable, and then the dependent variable goes up. For volume and pressure, what kind of relationship is that? So if I have a container of air molecules and I make it smaller, it's inverse, exactly. You know what? Those are the only 2 types that appear frequently. It's possible there is no relationship between variables, but oftentimes you're going to see direct and inverse. So if you can think about those and think about looking out for them, that's going to be really helpful for you. Really, really helpful. So if you hadn't had that background knowledge yet, then think about how you're coming away from today with more information. That's really exciting. So I'm going to write underneath here, especially because we're going to post this video on YouTube as well. I just want to confirm that temperature and pressure is direct and volume and pressure is inverse. So thinking about those, that didn't take us long to discuss, and you might want to look into it. It's actually their Boyle's and Charles law in science, and thinking about that can make a big difference. So that's what we're doing. We're taking information you already have, we're adding in, sprinkling a little bit of new information and making a difference in your score. So here is our research summaries. We know that it's a research summary because we have different activities. So don't start reading out. I just want to show you the layout. So we have information at the top right there. Then we have an activity 1, activity 2, and activity 3. So we have 3 separate activities, and we want to get a good idea of what they're doing before we answer the questions. Don't ever start answering the questions before you've read the activities. You're going to get, well, again, possibly a headache, but you also are going to make it harder for yourself, which will cost you some time. So first, go ahead and read just that first paragraph. So the question is, do you need to know transmittance and absorbance of solutions to get all of the points for this? It's a yes/no question. I don't often ask them, but we feel very strongly about this. Do you need to know exactly what transmittance and absorbance of solutions is? Oh goodness, I hope not. You don't need to know that. You don't need to have learned it in school. You don't need to have read it on the cereal box. Nope. You do not. So now that we know, okay, they're going to be talking about these 2 things, we're just looking for different patterns. We're looking for different ways that they relate to each other. So we have activity 1. Go ahead and read activity 1. Hi there. Can you see and hear me now? Okay, awesome. Unfortunately, when I get kicked out, I don't know because it seems live for me still. So I even typed to our tech expert, am I having trouble? And then it just all went blank. I missed you guys too. That was not so fun. But again, we're not going to have tech difficulties on test day. I think it's actually something with the room I got kicked out earlier. Maybe it was the soda idea. But let me scroll back up because I think you all were giving me an answer. Everybody said no. Oh, and then you didn't have an answer because you didn't hear my question. My question was, when we're taking a look, it was when I was trying to use the green arrow. So you know what? We discovered something really helpful. You all helped me a lot. When the green arrow doesn't work, I know I've been kicked out. Okay, so here's the thing, is you want to figure out what they're changing and what they're measuring. So they said they place solutions of increasing chlorophyll concentration into the SPEC 20 and record the transmittance. Okay, so when it is increasing chlorophyll concentration, is it an independent variable, something that they're changing, or a dependent variable, just something that happens and that they're measuring? Is it independent if they're changing the concentration, or is it dependent? It's an independent variable. That's perfect. Now, it gets a little tricky because sometimes there are multiple independent variables, which if you're doing something in a lab, you wouldn't actually have going on. So would you say that the wavelength is another independent variable, or the transmittance? The wavelength or the transmittance is an independent variable. They changed that thing as well. Did they change the wavelengths or did they change the transmittance? They changed the wavelength and then they measured the transmittance. So if they measured it, what is that called? If they measured the transmittance, and I'll write all this down, don't worry if you're thinking, oh my gosh, she's talking so fast. I have no idea what just happened. It's the dependence. Yes, okay, so here's the plan. We want to know before we start tackling the questions, and once you start practicing this, you'll get really good at looking at this. We have two independent variables. We have concentration and we have wavelength. And you'll be able to see it in a minute. There you go. And then dependent, we're measuring the transmittance in percentage. So independent variables are concentration and wavelength. That's what they're manipulating. And then the dependent variable is the transmittance. So knowing those two things gives you a handle on what they're doing. And here's the big, really fun thing, is once you get to the next activity, you can see what they did differently according to those independent and dependent variables. So if that's totally new for you, I strongly suggest you watch the video. It's going to make a big difference for you. Okay, go ahead and read activity 2. In this case, what do you think the dependent variable is? What did they measure this time? Is it transmittance again? Donna, we're going to show you in a moment. Absorbance. Yeah, you got it. So they're still changing wavelength and concentration. And now they're measuring absorbance. This is going to come in handy. So the practice of finding the different variables and what's different among the activities, that's where you want to spend the bulk of your time. And then we're going to show you how quickly the questions churn through once you have that idea. Okay, go ahead and read activity 3. What is the dependent variable here? The amount of transmittance. So if you're thinking about that independent, dependent variable, that's just so much easier to get through them. If you were just trying to think of this as just a reading comprehension type of activity, your head is gonna hurt. Oh my goodness. You want to have a set way to do things. If you're finding out what the independent, dependent variables are, it's a lot easier to figure out what's happening. And we still have not figured out exactly what transmittance means. That's totally fine. We're gonna get all of the questions right, despite the fact that we're not gonna be science experts. So let's try it out. Question 1 says, if the samples in activity 3 were run at a wavelength of 400 nanometers, the transmittant would most likely be closest to, well, through the power of PowerPoint, we're going to give you the figure 3. Now, the power of your pencil component comes in with this. You can very easily get stuck in a wrong answer if you're looking at the wrong part. You want to look at activity 3 and 400 nanometers. So since we are looking at, wait a second, 400's not on here. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Did I scare you? Probably not. So you use the power of your pencil to circle so we know we're in the right spot. We're definitely looking at figure 3. But then what happened? What do we do now? Do we not have enough information? Hey, I like it. Chelsea, we can estimate. So going back to the green arrow, which also tells me that I'm still live to you guys. We have 350 and we have 450. Oh, yeah, Sai, that's right. So it's a specific pattern. So even if you didn't recognize the pattern, you know what you can do? If 350 and 450 are the two measurements you want to be looking at and you want right in the middle, just do right in the middle of that. Can you just picture on a number line 55 and 65 and find the middle? And the question is, wait a second, is that actually science? Can we actually do that? Yeah, you really can. That's how you get to the answer. So now that, and if you have any questions, so we're definitely not ignoring anybody, go ahead and put them in the Ask a Grokka Expert. So this is the way we're going to do science, is we're going to look, make sure we're using the power of a pencil, looking in the right spot, and then thinking we can use number lines and take a look. For our first question, 88% accuracy on this one is really impressive. So the correct answer is 60, because what's in between 65 and 55? The number 60, exactly in the middle. Just like 400 is exactly in the middle here. We still have not figured out what transmittance is. We don't need to. Larry, it's too easy now that we knew what we were doing. And even it actually might be not quite easy yet, but if you practice, it's going to make a difference. Okay, so what would you circle with the power of your pencil in this question? Because we were just doing activity 3. Wouldn't we do activity 3 again? Isn't that how that works? Activity 3 for one question, activity 3 for all questions. Oh, so much better. So, you know how we were saying before, should you write everything down? You don't have to write everything down, but circling really for the science section makes a big difference. So strongly consider it. We don't want to tell you exactly what to do, but that is a very strong recommendation on our part. Okay, so here's a slightly harder question. And what they're looking for is it has the highest transmittance at the, be careful, the wavelength. So we're going with nanometers. So you're basically looking in vertical strips. Which one is going to give you the highest? And actually, this one, as long as you just are thinking about the highest and not bogged down with the idea of what about concentration, what are we supposed to do? And we have, there we go, 96%. So don't overthink it. Just look for the biggest numbers here. So sometimes what you wind up doing is you're just thinking, okay, wait, do I have to divide? What am I looking for? If you see overall bigger numbers, It follows patterns. So like Sai was saying before, there is a specific pattern. And when we have a transmittance that's lower, we have wavelength that's lower, we have higher transmittance. Wait, so what kind of relationship is that? As we lower something, the other one increases? What kind of relationship was that? Inverse. See how all this comes up again? As long as you learn the main components, you're going to see the same things again and again. It actually makes you feel really good about the test. They don't try to trick you. They are very predictable. It's really good. Okay, here's another question. What concentration of chlorophyll in activity 1 has the transmittance of 52 at 350? This seems straightforward, right? Well, if you use the power of your pencil, it can be. It's very easy to fall into a trap. So make sure you're looking at activity 1. You're going with 52%. Wait, so I found it 2 places. I found it here and I found it here. So there's 2 answers? What? A and B are correct? That cannot be. There's no such thing. So yes, Malay, you've got it. It says 350. So these are the types of questions that you can breeze through if you're using the power of your pencil and you're looking at the very specific thing that you're supposed to be looking at. So think about giving up a point like this just because you didn't circle it. What? No, we want to make sure you're circling. Yeah, that was really good. Okay, here's a little bit harder of a question. But again, through the power of PowerPoint, I'm going to give you the information. So knowing where to look is also really helpful. But they actually tell you, so don't start scanning everything. Go right back to sample 2, activity 2. And looking at the answer choices, they're all sort of rearranged differently, but in general, what 2 numbers stand out to you as being different among answer choices A and B and C and D? What 2 numbers do you see that are different? Because there's 0.2 in everything, there's 450 in everything. Do you see a pattern in the answer choices? Yes, Chelsea, good eye. It's a little bit of a Where's Waldo game. And if you're not familiar with Waldo, it's a children's book with a guy with a striped shirt. So one of the things they did was they switched the numbers around. Another thing that they did was they used different numbers. Are we supposed to be using 57 or are we supposed to be using 59? And Cordy, it seems like you should just put the order of the formula, but the thing is you also have to be using the correct number. Get rid of anything that's 59 because that's sample 1. Use the power of your pencil. So you're seeing how you can wind up with a score that does not make sense to you. You can wind up with a science score of 15 because you're finding the correct information, just not for what they were asking. So if you were to put down an answer that had the number 59 in it, you were just looking at the wrong sample. So that's what can be really frustrating about science, but that's also what can be a really big turnaround for you. It's just, okay, well, where was I supposed to be looking? Why didn't I get that point? What do I want to do differently? Sample 2, exactly. It has to be sample 2. They said it. So sample 2 is 57. It's over here. And then the other thing you want to do is make sure you have it in the right spot. So the A is the wavelength of light. And they say at a wavelength of 450, A is 0.2. So on the left-hand side, you should have, well, wait a second, there are 2 A's. Wait, so is A the absorbance or is A the wavelength? Or the concentrate? What is? You have to be really careful about the information. The capital A, yes. So see, they even use the same letters. So the correct answer is answer choice A because the big A is the absorbance, which is the 57. So you see how they even use the same letters, but if you match everything up, the 57 is the absorbance. Capital A is absorbance. Round of applause. Are we, oh, not quite at 100%. Okay, final question. And then we're going to do English for the last part of our presentation. Okay, we have the students in activity 1 are given an unknown concentration. Oh, no. This is a very common question, actually. They'll say, oh, well, for a 4th enzyme, what? You already had 3. That wasn't enough? Or they're given an unknown concentration. Really? Yeah, really. So what we do is we take the information and we assume that the trend continues. There's always a pattern. So we have a wavelength of 450, so that's this guy. And we need 40% transmittance. So what would its concentration be? Let me put a line, not a lion. It's going to be about here. So it's going to be halfway in between again. Yep, you can estimate or you can actually do the math. It's halfway in between. And it's going to be answer choice D. Perfect. So between 0.6 and 0.2, do you see how it's between 35 and 45? If you don't, you can ask. We have Chad and we had Alex join us. I didn't give you a chance to say hi to Alex, but we have Alex here with us as well. I'm so excited that I just jumped right over that. So Alex came to join us and we have assistants here as well. So what's neat about Grocket, so we had a question about, do these seem easy to you? And we picked these out in particular because they're the best to demonstrate the method. So they're not necessarily the highest difficulty that you're going to see throughout the test. But you know what? In Grocket, you can actually set your difficulty level. So if you want to study high difficulty questions, we have that. You can actually figure that out. If you have the red book, the end of any math section is going to be higher difficulty, but any other section is really tough to find the high difficulty questions. So Grocket actually, if you do custom practice, it'll filter it for you, so you don't have to search around for them. And yes, you get to choose your poison. Speaking of which, some people don't like the English section. We're finishing out strong. And the English section is the first section in the test, but I didn't start with that for our study plan. And the reason is because math is oftentimes an area where you can see an immediate increase. And English can take a little bit longer. And one of the reasons is because either you don't remember the rules or you never learned them. However, the test is predictable. So if you learn the rules, you can actually do really well. Now, another thing, remember how we were talking about if you think of yourself as a casting agent, a big Hollywood casting director, that's really helpful. We have another idea for English. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to be living in the Hollywood Hills. In fact, you're going to be the same person you are right now. And you're going to show up in your English class or language arts, and your teacher's going to say, "Great news, everybody, we're doing peer reviews today." And everyone goes, "Oh." Well, welcome to the ACT English section. These are not written to be expert essays. These are written to be peer-reviewed essays. And if you didn't know that ahead of time, it makes it a lot harder to do well in this section. So you're reading this just like you would read another student's work. And you know what's nice about that is it's a lot easier to find errors in somebody else's work than your own. And that's why peer reviewing is actually helpful. And wait a second. So why do colleges want to know how well you do at peer reviewing or proofreading? Why would you need that for college? Why would you need to know how to do this? Madison, that's one way to look at it. Writing can be one of the most important tools. You do tend to write papers. Depending on your college major, you may write a lot of papers or a few papers. But I can tell you, no matter what your major is, and if you want to share your major with us, now would be a great time to put it in the chat box, what you'd like your major to be. No matter what your major is, you are going to have to write a paper at some point. And a great way to annoy a professor is to write very badly, or to write but not proofread. You don't want to do that to your professors. And professors have a lot of papers to read. So we want to make sure that you can convey what you're thinking. And one of the ways to check to see if you have that skill is in the ACT English section. So no matter, you know what, there's not a Well, I'm trying to look. Yep, I looked through all of them. There is not a major you listed that doesn't require at least one paper. I'm very sorry to say. Nobody here has found one that doesn't require a paper somehow, somewhere. I read through them. Nope. So we want to make sure that you know how to get your points in your English section, and overall, we just want to make sure you're comfortable with this idea. So one of the recommended approaches includes this idea of reading only until you have enough information to figure out if there's an error. You're not going to read the entire essay. One of the things I talk about in the video is that you don't want to skip around. It's very tempting if there is not an underlying segment to skip that sentence. Please do not do that. And if you're thinking about this in terms of if you're reading someone else's work, you don't want to skip any sentences in that either, because you're not going to have any idea what they were trying to tell you overall. So you need to be reading all the way through. So if that's not something you've been doing, that's a new thing for you to start doing. Do not skip anything. Right, Vanessa, at the end when you have to answer questions about the whole passage, yes, skip them. Then you're not going to have that. The other thing too is concise is really helpful. Concise means short. So if you find an error, get rid of the no change option and then go to the shortest answer choice to see if that fixes the error. If it does, you're done. If it doesn't, then keep going. But they really like short, concise wording. So in terms of connections, this is 7 points. This is the biggest category. You are going to need to have read the entire passage as you're going along to have correct transitions. So whether you have reinforcement, meaning a straightforward transition, contrast transition, cause and effect, or sequence, there's no way you're going to figure that out if you haven't read through everything. So make sure you're not skipping around. If you want those 7 points, and I do questions in the video for this, you're going to need to have read the entire thing. So that's the major step for you. If you're not doing that yet, make sure you're doing that. The next thing you need to be looking out for is verb tenses. Another reason not to skip, because you have to have consistency throughout. Now, one of the good things is that you don't have to label what the different verb tenses are. You just have to make sure you know when they're wrong. So make sure that the verb tenses are matching up with everything else. But in general, those first two categories are about practice. There's really nothing else where you think, oh, I didn't learn that rule. It has to do with practice, what makes sense in the sentence. Wordiness is a really fun one. You can grab 5 points by remembering this. When you see the option omit the underlined portion, do you think that that answer is usually right, 50-50, or usually wrong? When you have the option of omit the underlined portion, is it usually right, 50-50, or usually wrong? It is usually right. It is not 50-50. It used to actually be 9 times out of 10. It's lowered a little bit because people just figured that out and started choosing it. So omit the underlined portion is correct the majority of the time. So if that's an option, double check. The only reason it wouldn't be correct if it deletes information necessary to the passage. But what you can do is check to see if it's already stated somewhere else. So if they say 50 years and then they say 5 decades, get rid of the 5 decades or 50 years, whatever one's underlined. If it has nothing to do with the passage, then omit that. It is very good to know that one. So 5 points just for always looking at the shortest answer choice first and picking it if it solves the problem. And not adding in any extra wording. Extra wording is not going to help you out. They want conciseness, which again goes back to this idea of professors have a lot of papers to read, but they'd rather read a 20-page paper or a 5-page paper with the same information, just fewer words. I know I'd prefer to read that 5-page paper, especially if I have 200 students. Now here's the big one. A lot of students miss out sometimes on all 5 of these punctuation points because of these itty-bitty, nitty-gritty, I feel like Dr. Seuss, rules. These rules that you think, when did I learn that? You gotta be kidding. I didn't learn that. Or I learned that, I have no idea what you're talking about. Either way, they don't take long to learn. And by learning these, you are going to get more points. It's just, that's how it works. More points for you if you're thinking, oh my gosh, commas, no thanks. Yes, please, commas. Because you know what? A comma has to have a specific rule. Punctuation is no longer your enemy. There are only 5 ways. I almost said 5 ways. You know it's late when I'm going, 5 ways. This is what one of my coworkers, Ethan, said, that's a visual typo. 5 ways. No, there are 5 ways to use commas. Are there 6 ways? No, just 5 ways. So don't put in any unnecessary commas. They're not allowed. If you see a comma, you go over to that comma. You say, what is your job? And if he or she does not have a job, you say, you are out of here. There are only 5 different ways commas are used. So you want to also keep in mind that commas and semicolons are totally not the same thing. If you've ever been told that commas and semicolons are the same thing, I'm very sorry to hear that. It is not true. They don't even look alike. One has a little extra dot on top. So you tell us. Is a comma like a period, or is a semicolon like a period? Yes, the semicolon. The semicolon separates 2 independent clauses, so keep that in mind. But here is the list of the 5 ways. You can have items in a list. You can set off non-essential info, which is actually called something specific that's called an appositive. You can set off introductory phrases. You can separate 2 independent clauses with a fan voice word. And in the video, I tell you what that is. Actually, I tell you it wrong to begin with. Let me see if I do it right this time. For, and, nor, fan, but, or, yet. So there we go. There they are. I got my words right. I just had them in the wrong order. So those are fan voice words. Those are what we call coordinating conjunctions. It doesn't take you long to learn. Let's say you put in 30 to 45 minutes of studying punctuation. 5 points is a big difference, especially if you're not picking up any of those points. Because you could have good intentions with punctuation, but if you don't know the rules, you're missing out. Okay, so the last one, Nada, that one is, I went outside. So I decided to run around. So those are 2 separate independent clauses. I went outside can be its own sentence. I decided to run around, own sentence. So that's another coordinating conjunction. So in general, you just want to know that you can use those like a period. So a comma and a fan voice is like a semicolon or a period. And again, it's just these rules. I didn't make them up, promise. But knowing the 5 different ways to use them is super, super helpful. In terms of semicolons, the only weird one, you may see it only once on the test, is just that it could be used to separate items when you have a really long series. But it's similar to the idea of brackets in math. So if you have parentheses in math and you've got a big equation, you might then use brackets. So semicolon in general is pretty straightforward. Colons aren't used a ton, but they're definitely not semicolons. So on the other side of a colon, there shouldn't be a full sentence. Colons, they don't try to be too tricky about. But here's the big one. This might be big news to you. Dashes are usually fine. A dash is a chameleon. It can be a period, a comma, a semicolon. It's just kind of its own thing. The only thing you want to make sure is that there's parallelism. If you use one dash as a comma, you have to use another dash. Or let me say it a different way. You cannot mix and match. Mix and match dashes and commas. And we're almost done. We're nearing the 9:30 mark, but punctuation is the last thing that we're talking about tonight. And we know you have a lot of questions about these. So you cannot mix and match dashes and commas. So I'll give you an example. My sister, an architect, lives in Boston. Hopefully that looks kind of wrong to you. They do this on the test, and you have to make sure whatever's underlined, make sure you fix whatever the one is. You can either turn that one into a comma or turn the comma into a dash. Either way is totally fine. It's just you can't mix and match. So in terms of last minute tips, you know when you start to feel the jitters is usually 1 week out. So you know what we should do? I feel like we should meet again. I feel like we should come back to this classroom a week before test day and have me just say, okay, don't worry, take a deep breath. We could do ACT yoga if we needed to. We're gonna make sure that you're going into test day feeling really good. And by that point, you will have already seen so many videos and have gotten lots of practice. So the last thing that I just wanted to point out in terms of apostrophes, and if you can see I have a typo on the slide, all of this stuff that we put together is totally, it's not homemade, but it's stuff we put together. So if you see anything, because I type them out and we're working on this as a small team, let us know and we'll improve it. But keep that in mind that we're putting together these resources for the first time. So it's almost like a beta version, and we really appreciate the feedback you've given already. So for apostrophes, which will be spelled right on the test, just know the difference between possessive and contraction. So the rest of your study plan is as follows. You have math and reading for week 5. I'm going to do a video and send that out to you tomorrow night. Or actually, the video's done. I just have to send out the email. We have science and English for week 6. We have the essay we're not going to talk about till week 7 because that's actually not factored into your score of 36. And then, don't worry that I'm flipping through these. We have a video posted of all of the entire outline. It's 7 minutes long. It's not very long to watch. And then finally, we finish up with review. But you know what we're going to do? Final week, we're going to meet here again. Videos are on YouTube. Great question. Actually, I have a whole list of them. Oh, look at that. I was about to say I have a whole list of them, and then they pop up right here. And I'm just actually going to move it down here. You can scroll through it. The reason is because I wanted to show you your options. I just want to remind you one more time. We're down to our final minute. And last time we met, we actually had an extra 30 minutes at the end. This time we're going right to the wire. We had 90 full minutes of information for you. And we appreciate that you joined us. We know it's not easy to take time out of your day, but think about 90 minutes of studying from start to finish. I mean, we did talk a little bit in the beginning and a little bit at the end, but that's a lot of studying you just got in. So options to complete your missions each week is you can just use your study plan tab and Grok it. It's the easiest way to do it, especially if you have the time and you're just not sure what to do. You actually follow along and just fill out every single one of these. You click on each, and that's a great way to do this. If you prefer to study with people, we do have a mascot. His name is Taco Pete. So if you see him in one of the games, then you know that's a game that I set up for you. So for example, I set up prose fiction passages a long time ago when we were doing that. And then also don't forget about the red book. So you have that as well. So let's go ahead into our exit layout. We're right on the nose. It's 8:30 where I am. I'm in Central Time Zone, but it's 9:30 on the East Coast. We have users from all over the world actually joining us. We can go ahead and clear this out. And if you wanted to share with us, just to show us just how much we've gathered people from across the world, even if you want to give us your hometown and state, please don't give us your actual address, but if you want to give us your hometown and state, it'll give us a good indication of how lucky we are to be working with people from all over. And Taco Pete, so I was telling you how here at Grok It we're really passionate about helping people. He is one of my many foster dogs I've had over the years, and he's one of my favorites. He lives in Miami now. I'm up here in Chicago. Nisha, that's a great question. So Grok It has a 3-day free trial that you can use at any time. If you only need a month, then you can think whether or not it's $29.99 for 1 month. It's a recurring subscription in case you need to study for more than 1 month. But if you want just 1 month, you want to think am I going to use it? Is $30, does $30 make sense? So for a lot of our students, they really like that idea. Okay, I'm going to pay $30. I'm going to use it. We have over 2,000 ACT questions actually that you can use while you're using Grokkit. And a lot of our students like that option. If you prefer to use the Red Book and you want to just follow along, watch the videos and not use Grokkit at all, it's totally fine with us as well. We're really looking to just make this experience easier for you and to get to know a little bit more about students and what's helpful to them.